Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining from different corners of the world. And welcome to this webinar on nuclear disarmament and the struggle against imperialism. It's organized as part of the League Against Imperialism Centennial Campaign. My name is Wim, and I'm your moderator for today. So 80 years ago, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki showed the world a terrible new kind of destruction. Instead of learning a lesson, powerful nations turned nuclear weapons into tools of control. They created an unfair global system where a few countries can have these weapons while others cannot. And this system is full of hypocrisy. It's a system that has often harmed people in the global south through nuclear testing, extraction of raw materials, and through military threats. But during this whole period, a powerful resistance has risen, and the fight for a world without nuclear weapons is deeply connected to the fight against imperialism. Today, we're honored to have some incredible speakers of this movement with us, and we're proud to be spanning the globe from Costa Rica in the US over the UK to Japan. With Masako Wada, Umana and Nick Rabb, we have a panel of top experts. But first, we will hear from Jeremy Corbyn. We know him as a British politician and peace activist, and he has just returned from the 80th anniversary commemorations in Hiroshima. Unfortunately, he will have to leave us soon because of his busy schedule, but we're very happy that he found time to share his impressions from Hiroshima with us. So, Jeremy, can we hear from you first? What were your impressions about the commemoration in Hiroshima and Nagasaki?
Thank you, Wim, and thank you very much for accommodating my problematic schedule, because I'm in the northwest of England at the moment, in Blackburn in Lancashire, where we've got a huge public event about to start for the launch of our new political party in Britain, yourparty.uk. And I can assure you, as long as I'm alive, if I have anything to do with it, this party will be anti-nuclear. This will be a party of peace, and this will be a voice for peace all over Britain. And we're very determined to ensure that that happens. To me, it was an enormous honor to be able to go to Hiroshima and to Nagasaki for the 80th commemoration of the explosion of those nuclear weapons. I have been involved in the campaign for nuclear disarmament and the peace movement ever since I was a teenager in school. And I obviously experienced many emotions and many events about peace all around the world. Nothing prepared me for the emotion of being in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, listening to the elders who had suffered and discussing with them and with many others the prospects for real peace around the world. And I was impressed that now 2 million people a year are visiting the Hiroshima Museum, the Museum of the Bomb, and what went on there. So I think well done all those that organised that event, and well done the message that has to be there. It wasn't just the 300,000 who died within a few days of the explosions. It was the 1.5 million that died afterwards, which you quite rightly drew attention to. Those that died in nuclear testing in the Pacific, in Central Asia, in Russia, in the United States, and in Australia, and those that died from nuclear testing as well. But also those that were grotesquely exploited to mine uranium, which was used to be processed in order to make the first nuclear weapons in 1945. And then when you tell people about 1.5 million who died as a result of those explosions going forward over the next couple of decades, you begin to see the horror show that's involved. And so the peace movement around the world has always been a peace movement to get rid of nuclear weapons, obviously supported the principles behind the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. But as you quite rightly pointed out, there's a fundamental flaw in the treaty in that it gives protection of a sort to the declared nuclear weapon states at the expense of all the others. None of them have fulfilled their obligations to take steps towards disarmament, apart from a brief period in the 1990s. And we're now in a situation where all of the major nuclear powers in the world, without exception, are developing a new generation of nuclear weapons and a new generation of delivery systems. And so that has to be the focus of our opposition. The nuclear ban movement is incredible. It gets hardly any publicity or discussion in the mainstream media in Western Europe or the United States, but in reality, almost half of the nations who are members of the United Nations, and that's pretty well everybody, have already signed it, and 70 have already ratified it. And so it is important that we mobilize all around the world for a nuclear ban movement. People say to me, it's impossible. How can you ban nuclear weapons? I said, if you can ban chemical weapons, if you can ban landmines, then you can ban nuclear weapons as well, who are grotesquely more dangerous than either of those other two horrible weapons that are in use. And so we have to up the strength of that. And a big movement to get huge delegations to New York for the NPT review treaty next year and fold it in to the nuclear ban movement and what goes with it as well. And so we need to be there in numbers in New York next year. But we also need to be a voice for peace in all the other conflicts, because you can see how they can descend into a nuclear conflict. I've just been rereading how the First World War broke out, from the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo by a series of secret interlocking mutual defense agreements. Within a few weeks, the world was at war and millions died on the Western Front in Europe, and it sucked in soldiers from the colonies of Britain, of France, of Germany, and Russia, all who died in that terrible conflict. And you could see how the war that's now going on in Ukraine could easily descend into that. You've got nuclear armed Russia, and you've got a huge ability of nuclear weapons from the NATO states that are supporting Ukraine. I do not support anyone invading anybody else's country and occupying them. So I do not support the Russian intervention there, as I should imagine nobody else on this call does. But there has to be a process. There has to be a ceasefire. There has to be a way forward on that. And we should use everything we can to support those nations, like President Lula in Brazil, like the African Union, like the late Pope, trying to get a ceasefire. The conflict that is occupying the minds of so many people now, quite rightly, is the horror show of Gaza, where we're watching live television in real time, people being starved to death. I got a message this morning from my good friend Mustafa Barghouti, who listed another 300 people that have died from starvation in Gaza. There's no shortage of food, there's no shortage of water, there's no shortage of power, except none of it is allowed to enter Gaza. None of it is allowed to feed or sustain Palestinians. And so the international global campaign of solidarity with the Palestinians, of ending the expansionism of Israel to take over Gaza, the West Bank, and the Jordan Valley, has to be stronger, bigger, and more universal. Just remember, Israel does have nuclear weapons. We only know about that because of the bravery of Mordechai Vanunu, who suffered many years imprisonment in solitary confinement for telling the world the truth about Israel's nuclear weapons. The world is spending $2.4 trillion a year now on weapons, including weapons of mass destruction. In our country, we've been told that we have to cut expenditure on disability benefits in order to pay for an increase in arms expenditure. That is monstrous. That is simply wrong. The history of the 21st century is going to be written in brutal terms about the political leaders that fail to do anything. We've got the opportunity to turn it round. We've got the opportunity on the impetus that we got from what was going on, those wonderful people that came to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And we've got the wonderful opportunity of influencing and exciting and mobilizing young people all over the world. We want to give to them a world of peace, a world free of nuclear weapons, a world free of war, when their wonderful imagination and their skills can protect and defend and improve our environment and reduce the levels of global human inequality and stop the destruction of the natural world. That's what our cause is about. That's what peace is about. That's what solidarity is about. Thank you to the people of Japan for all the horror they went through in 1945, which was actually the first weapon of the Cold War, not the last weapon of the Second World War, and to try to bring about a world of peace. Do you know what? We can do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy, for this very powerful opening statement. And then thank you for joining us. So we wish you all the best in the next of your in your next schedules later today and in the coming days and weeks. So we will now continue
I've
this.
got 3 more speeches this afternoon.
Yes, yes, I can imagine. So we will continue the conversation in the meantime with three speakers.
Thank you.
The first speaker will be Masako Wada. She is a survivor, a hibakusha, as they say in Japan, of the Nagasaki bombing, and a leader of Nihon Hidankyo. Her organization, which gives a voice to the survivors, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize last year. Our second speaker will be Dr. Carlos Umania. He's a doctor from Costa Rica. He's on the steering group of ICAN, the international campaign to abolish nuclear weapons, that also received the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017. And he's also the co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, IPPNW. And then there's also Nick Rabb, who was willing to stand in for Jeremy on very short notice. He's a member of the US peace movement, serving on the board of the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. He attended the 80th anniversary commemoration in Hiroshima and Nagasaki with Jeremy earlier this month. So we will first listen to Masako Wada. She will talk about her experience as a survivor. Miss Wada, or Wada-san, as they say in Japan. Of course, we would like to know more about your experience as a hibakusha, but I also have some more specific questions, because the average age of the hibakusha is now at 86.
Yes.
So how are we going to ensure that the next generations will continue to campaign against nuclear weapons? And I would also like to ask you, what role did the Nobel Peace Prize play in that regard? But maybe in the first place, can you tell us more about your experience as a hibakusha?
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Wilson. Okay. I was 1 year and 10 months old when Nagasaki was devastated by the atomic bomb. I was inside my house, located 2.9 kilometers away from the epicenter, blast center. Thanks to the mountains surrounding the central part of Nagasaki City, which somewhat shielded my house from direct impact of the bomb. So I did not suffer any burns or injuries and have survived to this day. As I was only a baby then, I do not remember anything about that time, nor can I tell you of the indescribable tragedies that our senior hibakusha witnessed and experienced on that day in the aftermath. But I was certainly there with my mother and my grandfather. So allow me to share with you a little about what my mother used to tell me over and over again. It was a very hot day on August 9th. My mother was preparing lunch out of meager ingredients she had gathered. Air raid warning had that sounded in the morning had been lifted. I was playing alone in front of the house. She said to me, "Come in, it's too hot outside." So I came inside. It was a usual pre-lunch time in a quiet residential area. Suddenly she heard a tremendous sound. When she came to, she found over 30 centimeters, about 1 foot, a pile of dust accumulated inside a house located about 2.9 kilometers south of the blast center, which was in Urakami district in the north part of Nagasaki City. The pile was composed of shattered end fragments, window panes, sliding doors, and clay walls of the house. The huge green mountains surrounding the city had turned brown. After a while, my mother saw a standing sight, a line of people escaping the fire from Urakami, the hypocenter, and seeking water and help, came over the mountains and descended from Mount Kompira to the urban area where our house was located. From a distance, the people staggering down looked like a line of ants, but in fact they were rows of burned and injured chocolate-colored people. They had little or no clothing on, and their hair was blooded and matted like horns. In the space next to our house, a vacant lot created by demolishing houses in advance to prevent the spread of fire during air raids. Cremation continued day after day. The smell of it made it impossible to eat anything. The corpses of the victims were brought in by the box-shaped garbage carts, one after another. People who collected the bodies from the roadside grabbed the limbs and threw them into the garbage carts. The bodies from the roadside carts so casually. Burnt limbs are sticking out of the carts like dolls. People were talking about how many or few here there were each day, and soon they stopped feeling anything at all about the site. There the bodies were burned like garbage. What is human dignity? Should human beings be treated like that? My mother used to tell me that every August that smell would come back. On the 15th of August, the day the war ended, my mother was sent to the temporary relief station. She helped with the treatment of people who had been taken in for injuries and burns. The sight of the people lying on the floor filling the auditorium was beyond description. She was assigned to follow the doctor carrying antiseptic solution, but people's wounds were so severe that she passed out on the spot. Once she came to her senses, she was relegated to cleaning up work. She had to use a broom to sweep away the maggots that were swarming all over the survivors' festering wounds. The maggots were so big as her thumb. She had never seen maggots that big and in such large number, and thought she would never see them in the future. The US military also dropped the machine radio sensor by parachute at the same time as the atomic bomb to report the condition of the dropped bombs. Among the many victims were not only Japanese, but also Koreans, Chinese, and POWs of the Allied forces. These were people who happened to be there on that day, away from home, regardless of nationality or race. Didn't the machine attached to the parachute tell the US military anything other than the atomic bomb? My mother questioned. Didn't they tell them about the lives of the people under that mushroom cloud, about their families, and above all, about the preciousness of life. Brigadier General Thomas Farrell, who was in charge of the Manhattan Project, arrived in Japan shortly after the atomic bombing, and at a press conference, she stated to the effect that all those who were doomed to die had died, and there was no one suffering from radiation. As a result, all the temporary relief stations were closed. In Japan, a defeated nation reporting on the damage caused by the atomic bombing was severely restricted by the United States. Many people died without knowing why they were dying. The number of dead within concentric circle from the hypocenter by the end of December 1945 were estimated at 140,000 in Hiroshima and 90,000 in Nagasaki, each with an error margin of 10,000. 65% of them were children, women, and the elderly, and only 4% of them died while being cared for by someone. Many of them were burned like garbage without being identified who they were or where they were from. Those who were cremated by the hands of their families may have been fortunate. Survivors were never informed of the causes of their ill health and suffering. They were tormented by survivors' guilt, illness, and poverty, and had to give up many their dreams. They were also subjected to discrimination and prejudice because of the lack of understanding in society. For 9 years following the atomic bombing, they were abandoned by the Japanese government and the United States, as no medical care or assistance were extended to them. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
This is what my mother used to say, tell me.
Okay, maybe we can come back to you later. So thank you very much, Wada-san. But let's maybe go to the other speakers first, and then we'll have a free-flowing discussion and question and answer afterwards. And all participants actually can drop their questions also in the chat box, so we can ask them to any of the panelists later in the program. But let's turn to Carlos maybe, and Carlos is also going to show us some slides, if I'm not mistaken. But as a doctor and a scientist, you have also described how nuclear testing devastated indigenous and colonized peoples. Can you tell us more about the link between your scientific approach and the moral and political arguments for abolition?
Hi, Wim. Yes, I can. And thank you for the introduction. And I will not be sharing slides. In the end, I decided to go in a different way. But yes. So as you mentioned before, I'm here. I speak on behalf of two organizations. That's IPPNW, International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, and ICAN, which is the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. ICAN was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2017, which feels like a very short while ago, but isn't anymore. But it was awarded for two reasons. for raising awareness on the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons, and for leading for our groundbreaking efforts to establish a treaty-based prohibition of these weapons. We're talking about the TPNW, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So evidence and science have a key role to play here. Because at the heart of the current global order, at the heart of the problem, lies a very dangerous ideology, which is nuclearism. This is the political and strategic belief that nuclear weapons are essential for achieving geopolitical goals and for maintaining national and international security. Nuclearism treats these weapons not only as permanent fixtures of global power, but also as legitimate instruments of statecraft, and it normalizes the threats of mass destruction. So we challenge nuclearism with abolition, which is a movement to dismantle the system that legitimizes nuclear weapons. Quoting Setsuko Thurlow when she spoke in the Nobel speech, nuclear weapons are not a necessary evil. They are the ultimate evil. Abolition is grounded in reason, in evidence, and in humanity. It places people, not power, at the center of the debate. So this approach is known as humanitarian disarmament, and it is how other weapons of mass destruction, such as chemical and biological weapons, as Jeremy pointed out earlier, this is how these weapons were banned. Currently, there is no country, there is no state that boasts about being a chemical weapons power or about having biological weapons in its security doctrines. That's because there is a moral condemnation and a strong norm that makes such claims taboo. So the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Ban Treaty, emerged from the same logic. It was driven by scientific evidence, the testimonies of survivors, and the proven power of normative change. The state representatives, came together at the United Nations and decided to negotiate a ban, and it was negotiated by 2/3 of the international community. Now, talking specifically a little bit about nuclear weapons, they are weapons of mass destruction because, like chemical and biological weapons, they cause indiscriminate and catastrophic harm, and they do not distinguish between combatants and civilians. But nuclear weapons are by far the most destructive nuclear weapons, the most destructive weapons ever invented. To talk a little bit about the consequences of nuclear weapons, let's take, for example, a single weapon with a yield of about 100 kilotons. That is roughly 6 times the yield of the one detonated in Hiroshima. Currently, between the 9 nuclear weapon states, there are over 12,300 nuclear warheads, several of them more powerful than this one. But if this 100 kiloton weapon is detonated in a large city, it could instantly kill hundreds of thousands of people and injure countless more. Through its shockwave, heat, and radiation, a single nuclear detonation is capable of producing unimaginable destruction and suffering in both the short term and the long term. And when we talk about those wounded, as we just heard from the testimony of Wada-san, those suffering from radiation, in the short term, acute radiation syndrome can be extremely painful, causing the degradation of vital systems and organs in their victims. Several survivors described how their eyes popped out, their abdomens exploded, they had wounds they would not heal, or they would bleed to death. And the victims of this atrocious suffering, the non-combatant civilians, that is women, elderly, and children, would suffer their agony alone, without any medical assistance, because due to the radiation and the destruction of infrastructure, the roads and the hospitals, there is no possibility of response care in any country in the world. No Red Cross or Red Crescent can help here. Now, in the mid and long term, we're talking about chronic radiation syndrome, which includes cancers, problems with healing, birth defects, and an increased incidence of cancers in future generations. But this is one detonation. A large-scale nuclear war would involve dozens, perhaps hundreds, of far more powerful weapons striking multiple cities within minutes. So tens of millions of people would die in this scenario instantly, and hundreds of millions more would suffer and die slowly. The environmental toll would be global, radioactive fallout, ecosystem collapse, and a nuclear winter that is triggered by the suits that rises to the stratosphere, blocks sunlight, and plunges temperatures. So agriculture would fail, food chains would collapse, and species would vanish. In short, a large-scale nuclear war could end civilization and possibly even our species. And what is the risk of this happening? As of 2025, the doomsday clock stands at 89 seconds to midnight, the closest it's been in history. For the 12,300 nuclear warheads, around 2,000 remain in a state of high alert. That is, they are ready to launch within minutes. There have been numerous accidents involving nuclear arsenals. We know of at least 6 documented instances where the world came perilously close to a nuclear war by accident. Nuclear deterrence is ultimately psychological. When it fails, and it eventually will, the consequences will be dire. Now, in current times, where explicit threats are continuously being made and where several red lines have already been crossed, the likelihood of misinterpretation and miscalculation, as Jeremy pointed out earlier, increases. And these misinterpretations and miscalculations could lead to a break in the nuclear taboo. And if a nuclear war breaks out, there is no going back. Now, nuclear weapons are not just a threat in times of crisis. They have long obstructed peace. After 1945, the theory of mutually assured destruction promised to prevent conventional wars. It didn't. Nor did peace follow after the fall of the Iron Curtain in 1991. The flaw lies in a false premise that peace is merely the absence of war. However, peace is not passive. It is not the absence of conflict. That is impossible because in human relations, there will always be conflict. Peace requires a non-violent resolution of conflict. It requires dialogue, cooperation, and diplomacy. It requires finding common ground, building bridges, and coming to agreements. Nuclear weapons undermine all of this. They are tools of coercion, domination, and fear. They poison international relations. That is not peace. That is violence. Now, regarding nuclear weapons, we are not facing a natural disaster. This is not inevitable. This is a human invention and a political problem, and it can be solved. And the key to the solution is the universal rejection of nuclear weapons. And that is why we champion the TPNW, a treaty that stigmatizes nuclear weapons and confronts nuclearism through legal, financial, and moral mechanisms. With the ban treaty, the TPNW, there is no room for moral ambiguity. Either nuclear weapons are acceptable or they're not. A country that refuses to sign the TPNW is effectively endorsing their use and all that it entails. So, beyond stigmatization, the ban treaty also strengthens multilateralism, it fosters cooperation, and reinforces the rule of law, ensuring that relations between nations are governed by principles, not force. So, today, as also Jeremy mentioned, there's almost half of the world, well, half of the world right now is supporting the treaty. 98 countries, that's 73 states parties, and 25 signatures on their way to ratification. Now, nuclear abolition, we have to, as long as nuclear weapons exist, there will always be a risk. Nuclear abolition is the only path compatible with a livable future. It is a cause that belongs to all of us. We all have a role to play here. So, whoever you are, wherever you are, this is also your fight. A world free of nuclear weapons is not only necessary and urgent, it is possible. And together we can achieve it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. I think that's a very convincing argument for abolition, but we'll discuss more in depth after our next speaker, because I'm going to turn to Nick. So, Nick, you have just returned from Hiroshima. At a time of global tensions, what signs of hope and resistance did you see there, especially also from the global south? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so thank you, Wim, and thanks to the, League Against Imperialism Centennial Campaign for having me stand in, partially for Jeremy, for whom I have great respect. Glad to see him be able to pop in for a short amount of time. I hope to be somewhat as useful as he would have been in this session. And it's a great honor to be here with Carlos and Wada-san as well. So if you'll permit me as well, yeah, I'd like to also comment a bit on the sort of political dynamics we saw at the conference in Japan, because it was my first time at the conference, and it was quite extraordinary, I think, to see sort of the confluence of so many, international peace organizations and organizations of different nations come together to discuss this issue and witness the testimony of the Hibakusha. So, as we were saying, yeah, Jeremy and I were delegates to this 80th World Conference organized by Gensukyo, and I was honored to be invited there as a guest and a U.S. delegate as part of my work with the Campaign for Peace, Disarmament, and Common Security. And there is special importance to this 80th anniversary, this 80th commemoration, marking 8 decades since the attacks, and a profound grappling with a world where many seem to not have internalized the horrors of the bombing, given the passage of time, despite maybe logically and on the surface knowing about the horrors. And it was also a special year because it followed the recent Nobel Peace Prize awarded to Nihon Hidankyo in 2024. So this was a big moment and a very important meeting of parties. And I think, what became clear, I think, to me and many others at the World Conference is that, the tone is one of increasing urgency, I think, due to several factors. For one, we were present to witness the testimony of the Hibakusha, to learn and spread the message that human beings and nuclear weapons cannot coexist. And we were struck by, maybe as we'll speak about a little later, the, aging and declining population of Hibakusha who are sharing these stories and sharing the testimony. Simultaneously, there was quite an air of seriousness due to the fact that we're entering a period of renewed militarization, conflict, and nuclear posturing that present strong challenges for the peace movement. So at the World Conference, there were delegates from 15 nations convened to share their situations and learn from others. And one of the clear threads running through everyone's analysis was that, there's sort of a present danger of US-driven military policy that's escalating the nuclear threat. Just to name a few sort of examples of this that came up in many delegates' speeches and writings. The US is really pursuing its plans to counter its perceived threats by nations like Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. Part of this is involving expanding and strengthening NATO, whose European member nations were recently commanded by the new second Trump administration to increase their contributions to the organization to 5% national GDP, which some nations are going forward with and others are rejecting. The US alliances with nations in the Pacific region, like Japan and the Republic of Korea, are continuing and escalating. For example, in July, the US and Japan discussed scenarios where the US would use nuclear weapons in the event of conflict in East Asia, and the US and Republic of Korea are continually staging their annual large-scale military exercises. Other alliances like AUKUS and the Quad are somewhat continuing their influence, although it's maybe subject to a bit of turmoil and shakeup with the new Trump administration, and we're unsure if those will continue. But there's been also an increase in conflict. Notably, in June, the US bombed Iran's nuclear sites after Israel launched attacks at Iran, presumably after nuclear negotiations did not go in the US's favor. And now, as of yesterday, I think Iran seems poised to withdraw from the NPT as the E3 countries, France, Germany, and UK, have moved to trigger the snapback mechanism on the sanctions against Iran, which is a dangerous escalation, I think we all recognize. And as Jeremy mentioned, the US and other Western nations are committed to modernizing their nuclear weapons, which is projected to cost, at least in the US, almost 1.7 trillion, almost $2 trillion over 30 years. And the US is now, for the first time, I think, since 2008, has returned nuclear weapons to the United Kingdom at the Lakenheath Air Base. And over the summer, not to belabor the point, but India and Pakistan had a skirmish, two nuclear-powered states. Israeli pundits and ministers floated the idea of using nuclear weapons in Gaza. So suffice to say, conflicts and militarization have been increasing, and this was one major theme at the conference. Everyone was very concerned about this type of thing. But at the same time, we're also struck to sort of speak to the hope and the messages of resistance and organizing. I think we're all very struck by, while perhaps the global North countries and the Western countries are increasing their militarization, global South countries, by and large, are leading the non-proliferation movement, and they're leading movements for common security rather than this rhetoric of deterrence theory, as Carlos was saying, which is sort of an illogical theory that's bound to fail eventually. So the conference saw delegates from Cuba, Egypt, Marshall Islands, Mexico, Philippines, Vietnam, and other international organizations like the UN and International Peace Bureau. And representatives from these nations shared their successes, specifically in the widespread adoption, as we've heard, of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the TPNW. The TPNW, as Carlos had mentioned, has been signed by over 90 countries and ratified by 73. And it's, we really uplifted the success of this treaty as its, initial vote at the UN was passed by 122 nations in favor. The only states that did not vote or voted no were nuclear weapons states and NATO members. So there's a clear split, right? And the global South is leading this more sane push for diplomacy and common security. So it was a huge sign of hope for the conference. I also wanted to note as well that one of the other trends that we started noticing was that for global North countries and Western countries, there is quite a degree of similarity in political tactics and circumstances in nuclear states between US, European countries, and also Japan as well, which was striking for me and a lesson to be learned for me. Each of the nations are sort of fighting to stave off growing authoritarian regimes, taking power by using shockingly similar tactics of hollowing out social programs, increasing inequality, tapping into resentments and dissatisfaction, and then blaming, quality of life issues on immigrants or leftists or what have you. And in the US, I can say, speaking particularly, we see an acute escalation of these tactics by the second Trump administration while we're witnessing mass deportations and kidnappings by immigrations police, sort of a paramilitary war on enemies of the far right, and dismantling of social programs and government institutions. And this playbook seems to have been adopted in lighter versions by other nations, particularly across Europe. And I heard from some new friends and colleagues in Japan that also the right is sort of gaining power in Japan and using a similar anti-immigrant rhetoric and tactic to sort of spur their rise. So, sort of speaking again to the, Trump administration pushing NATO spending increases, there's worry about cutting social programs, as Jeremy mentioned, and other programs that actually benefit human life to pay for these increased militarizations. And this presents, a significant challenge to the global peace movement. And it would create less capacity to fight issues like nuclear disarmament and the pressing issues of the day. But I think also in the same vein, we saw it as quite a huge opportunity for the peace movement to locate a widely resonating issue on the fact that these far-right regimes are militarizing at the expense of life-giving programs and institutions, sucking money and resources out of our communities to fund their projects of death. And I suppose I'll finish by just saying two more signs of hope that I think really struck me. And one was sort of seeing, obviously, the testimony and hearing the testimony of the Hibakusha, who have led, a multi-decade campaign, nearly 100 years campaign to spread their stories and push for nuclear disarmament. Sort of witnessing that and really internalizing the strength and resilience and courage that it takes to continue organizing for so long and to keep uplifting these stories, I think invigorated the whole conference and gave a renewed sense of determination and hope to everyone who attended. And also, I'll say that, also, as Jeremy mentioned, there was a lot of common desire and will around the fight to acknowledge and stop the genocide in Gaza, which served as a confluence point and a framework of understanding the intertwining forces of colonialism and the military-industrial international sort of order. There were so many young organizers, women, non-binary and queer organizers that were all, incredibly concerned with the Gaza issue. There were Japanese Gaza protests at the same time as the commemorations. And I think that more and more we're seeing that young people across the nations are increasingly interested in a world of peace, a world without war. And there's incredible opportunity to seize on this moment and to spread this type of, anti-nuclear reasoning and these messages to young people, and they're ready to adopt them and fold them into their organizing, their advocacy, and their sort of common sense understanding of the world. So I'll close by saying the potential to build the power to enact this movement that's really being led by the Global South is there, that we just need to seize upon it.
Thank you, Nick. That's a message of hope indeed. So we'll go into question and answer, and I hope you allow me to start with a very newbie question, because you've been mentioning two treaties, the NPT and the TPNW, the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. The NPT dates from way back from 1968, if I'm not mistaken. Can you explain for a newbie? And I know many of the people participating will know already, but just in a nutshell, why did we still need the TPNW when there was already an NPT? What is the fundamental difference between those two treaties? And why are we all campaigning now for this new treaty, the TPNW? Just in a nutshell, for newbies like me. Who's going to take the question? Maybe Carlos, Nick? Carlos?
Sure. Okay, so in a nutshell, after the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, two pivotal treaties came about. The Treaty of Tlatelolco, by which the whole of Latin America and the Caribbean became a nuclear weapons-free zone, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or the NPT, which entered into force in 1970. It was negotiated in 1968 and then entered into force in 1970. So the NPT, as its name is non-proliferation, That means that by that time, there were 5 nuclear weapon states: the US, the Soviet Union, now Russia, China, France, and Great Britain. Non-proliferation means that there will be no more nuclear weapon states. But the treaty had 3 pillars. The first pillar was disarmament, meaning that the 5 nuclear weapon states committed to disarm over a period of 25 years. The treaty had an expiration date of 25 years. It would expire in 1995. The second pillar was non-proliferation, meaning that the countries that didn't have nuclear weapons would commit to not developing nuclear weapons. And the third pillar is the unalienable right to nuclear energy. So by 1995, I mean, the Non-Proliferation Treaty has been quite successful regarding non-proliferation. It's only had one dissident, which is North Korea. 3 countries never joined, which are India, Pakistan, and Israel, which developed their nuclear weapons in the 70s. But by 1995, there was really no progress at all by virtue of the NPT towards disarmament. So in 1995, when the treaty expired, it was decided to extend the treaty indefinitely. The problem with the NPT is that it created what people call a nuclear apartheid. It created a different obligations for the nuclear weapon states and the non-nuclear weapon states. The non-nuclear weapon states, they have to undergo revisions by the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog, which is the International Atomic Energy Agency, whereas the P5, the nuclear weapon states, they don't, right? And it does recognize that tiered relationship with nuclear weapons. So it really does not stigmatize nuclear weapons, and it actually reinforces the idea that nuclear weapons are somehow necessary for security. So in part due to frustration from the lack of progress with disarmament, in part also due to the commitment to disarm, because the commitment for disarmament applies to all the community that belongs to the NPT, not just to the nuclear weapon states, and also following what is called the humanitarian initiative, this momentum that started actually in a 2010 review conference about the humanitarian impact. A lot of non-nuclear weapon states got together to discuss the humanitarian impact of nuclear weapons. And there it was decided that another strategy was necessary. And that strategy was the ban treaty, which now establishes a universal global prohibition on nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are either good or they're not. There is no middle ground. There's no more moral ambiguity, because that's what the big issue in the 90s, after, when the Iron Curtain fell, that was a point of low tension. That would have been the ideal moment to get rid of nuclear weapons. It didn't happen because nuclear weapons had become a status symbol. Nuclear weapons have become an instrument of power and prestige. And that the NPT did actually reinforce that idea. So the TPNW at this stage works by stigmatizing nuclear weapons and by weakening what I mentioned earlier, nuclearism. And that is the mechanism by which several changes throughout the course of history have taken place, like the abolition of slavery, or like the abolition of the other weapons of mass destruction. So that is a new element on the table regarding nuclear weapons. And through this mechanism of stigmatization, that's how we hope we will, or no, that is how we will actually get rid of nuclear weapons. Yes.
No, thank you. That's very clear. So I will think of this the terminology you used, talking about nuclear apartheid and then a ban treaty, and I think that's the fundamental difference between the two, isn't it? Wada-san.
Yes.
You
Yes, I'd
want
like to
to
ask a
add
question. When I attended the NPT review conference 22, and I had a speech about as a NGO representative, and in a speech I condemned NPT's delay, and the almost high half century has passed since that treaty had been effective. But yeah, every 5 years, they had a meeting, but the effectiveness of the conference wasn't so successful. So because of I condemn the P5, the attitude, because of their insincerity and arrogance, brought the whole world has brought to the brim of the nuclear war. So is there any penalty for that? They are not so they are not keeping the obligation at all, just ignoring, just because of their power. Is that just a norm or not? Obligation is different. What do you think? I don't know. So dishonest, insincerity. What can we do?
So, Carlos or Nick, can you answer this question? Is there any punishment for breaking the rules?
Yeah, I suppose that's one of the issues with the UN power structure right now. They are the P5, right? The five permanent members of the Security Council.
That's right.
That is a structure that has aged very badly. I mean, the UN was created after World War II, and they were the five victors of World War II. But it is very clear that we need a different structure and we need a different systems of accountability. Because not only the first pillar, disarmament, is not working, the other pillars are not working. As we saw, well, in 2006, that North Korea left the treaty, but now Iran, that was complying with the NPT, that did not protect it from being attacked because of quote unquote lack of compliance with the NPT. So it was still attacked. And as Nick pointed out, as of yesterday, there was a the Iranian parliament is now starting a process to withdraw from the NPT. Now, a parenthesis here, there was the Iranian ambassador to Japan. It was reported in the Asahi Shimbun in August 5, I believe, that Iran was compelling Japan to join Iran in its efforts to abolish and ban nuclear weapons. So there's this idea that Iran is playing around with diplomacy and that Iran might actually go in the direction of a ban treaty. Iran actually participated constructively during the negotiations of the TPNW and has voted favorably during the uh, resolutions in the General Assembly. Every year there's a resolution in support of the ban treaty. 144 countries actually vote in favor of this resolution, Iran included. So Iran could still backtrack from that process of withdrawing from the NPT. They haven't done so. I mean, they haven't. That decision is not final. This is just a process that was started in the parliament. Hopefully, they will choose diplomacy, and the world is watching, because if Iran uh, uh, leaves the NPT and acquires nuclear weapons, then this would be a precedent for proliferation, and the NPT regime would fall apart. Yeah, so there is right now very little accountability because of the people holding power, because of imperialism. And that is something that we, especially those who live in democratic societies, have to fight against.
Perhaps I would add as well, to Wada-san's question, which I think is absolutely the correct question, and also how I was mentioning one of the themes from the World Conference was everyone's concern about, additionally, the genocide in Gaza, speaking of the lack of enforceability of UN mechanisms by, one member of the Security Council and its proxy in the Middle East. I think, yeah, as Carlos saying, this lack of accountability, I think we need to be more creative and more broader thinking in our international organizational cooperative strategies to leverage influence on these few countries, right, who hold, it's an interesting question to say who hold power. Of course, they hold tremendous power in the legal system that they've set up in the post-war period through the UN and other international bodies, and they hold tremendous economic power and in many ways cultural power. But I think as we also know of our own nations, we know that the structures of power of, top-down authority are only as strong as the willingness of the whole complex system that support them to keep enacting this system, right? So viewed at an international scale, I think there are opportunities that we need to be thinking creatively about to strategize in the complex machine that exists to uphold global North power. What, you know, wrenches can you throw into the cogs of the machine, right? Whether those are economic pressures, perhaps thinking of, um, global, how do I want to say, boycotts that stopped South African apartheid and are now pushing back on the, genocide in Gaza and were originally created to push back against the apartheid state in Palestine created by Israel. So economic measures that can be enacted by the vast, agreeing majority of the world who agrees that nuclear weapons are a horrible thing that should not exist. Um, in addition to, these diplomatic measures that are giving legitimation and are giving legitimacy to the fact that we can say so many nations across the world, people around the world, the vast majority think that these are a horrible thing. Yeah, what creative tactics can we use? And, perhaps the other panelists can also chime in for, yeah, other creative ways to wield bottom-up power in the international system.
Yeah, that also relates to one of the questions, or to several questions that were asked in the chat. For example, Marie Noël asked, how can we fight the fear that big powers are creating, making people feel powerless?
Yeah. I can start with this one because I had seen it, and it's a really good question. And I think that if that is the mechanism of control, of course, fear and despair. If we fall into despair, if we lose hope, they have won, right? So we have to be mindful of that. We also have to be mindful that the mainstream media reproduces the discourse in power, right? So we're not going to get our truth necessarily from what we see every day. What we can do is, well, be hopeful, be strategically optimistic. It's easier for me to say that because, well, with the TPNW process, when we started going to the UN, when I joined ICANN in 2013, and I started going to the UN in 2013, and nobody at all was talking about a ban. What we counted, like to hold on to something, we counted the numbers, the number of times the word ban came up in the General Assembly or something. 4 years later, the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons was being negotiated at the UN by 2/3 of the international community. Change can happen, change is happening, right? And those of us who are working there, we see it, right? So we can be hopeful. And of course, we're hopeful in the idea that we are also being part of the change. We're moving, we're doing something. So I would say that be mindful of your agency. Everybody has a role to play here. Everybody has something to do to get a nuclear weapons free world. And what we need to do is to universally, unequivocally condemn nuclear weapons, support the ban treaty, uh, have this conversation, inform yourself. There's this book I have here in the background, subtly, Nuclear War by Annie Jacobsen. It's a very powerful book that gives us a lot of information, and it's very easy to read, and it makes people an expert if you read it uh, entirely. But anyway, inform yourselves and have make nuclear weapons be a topic of conversation at a bar, at a tavern, at the dinner table with people. We have to challenge the idea that nuclear weapons are inevitable. It's not about, people say nuclearism, the genie is out of the bottle. We can't do anything. So we have to live with this fear. It's not about putting the genie back into the bottle. It's about taking the power away from the genie, like we did with biological weapons and chemical weapons. Like we did with slavery. We have changed it. We just have to everybody agree on what value we give to nuclear weapons. We have to agree that nuclear weapon states are not nuclear powers, but nuclear pariahs. And we, all of us, have a role to play here. So get involved and be optimistic. Optimism is realistic because only the people who believe in change are the ones who can make change happen.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. There's also a specific question specifically for you, Wada-san. And the question is, how are you involving young Japanese in the peace movement these days? Can you talk about that?
Yes, young people in Japan are starting to keep going. Yes, I think so. Just like Tanaka-san is always say, just listen to our testimony and please think. Please listen to us. I always say that too. I listen to us and sympathize, not sympathize, but empathize. Not they are so beautiful people or something like that. That's not enough. So not sympathy, but empathy. Feel in the same feeling and think about what you can do and take action with us together. That's what we are saying. So they are starting to act. So we have the campaign, we have the NGO campaign in Japan, and there are so many peace movement and organization. So each organization has its own activity, but we have to get together to get more power. So we last April, last year, we had the NGO campaign to abolish nuclear weapons. And our Tanaka-san is the top director, and I'm the vice director. And more than 30 organizations got together. We are starting. So our motto is our aim is to abolishment to nuclear weapon and to the Japan's ratification to the treaty. So that's our goal. And we're working with the motto with the we don't have to we don't have to think about the political parties but not over the generation, over the political ideas and political generation and political religion. Any kind of religion can join our campaign. That's what we are doing now. So I'm working with my grandsons, sons and daughters' age together. So we are so happy, and they are very becoming very active. We have many volunteers. So the Hibakusha dialogue, we are having that, and we are trying. So the article 12 of the universalization in TBNW's article 12. So not only the ratification universalities, but the universalities of our testimony spread out. That's the two means. That's what we thought. We are trying here. And Chair the Freeness says that's very important to spread out the testimony, to work not only young generation, but all over Japan, all over world. So we have to spread out our testimony more and more. I'd like to try. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It's good to hear that also your grandson is involved now.
Yes.
So it's several generations of peace activists.
Yeah.
I have another question for you, Wada-san, if you don't mind, because when we met a couple of weeks ago, you told me the story about the establishment of your organization of Nihon Hidankyo. It was established in the mid-50s, and it also had something to do with nuclear testing. And because we've been mentioning this, the effect of nuclear testing on the global south, can you tell us something about that period? What happened? That was the Marshall Islands, isn't it?
Oh, I see. As I said before, shortly after the atomic bomb, General Thomas Farrell, the deputy, the commanding general, came to Japan. I already told that story. So the Hibakusha needed to kind of hiding, and they cannot go out or because of that discrimination or prejudice. And after 9 years, the United States tested hydrogen bomb test near Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Island in 1954. So I showed this spread across the vast area, and the 23 Japanese fishing crew, tuna fish boat. There's so many, about 1,000 fish boat was there at that time. And especially the Daigo Fukuryuma, one of the boat, the 23 Japanese fishing crew were exposed to the radiation fallout, and one of them died after 6 months later. And the public became aware of the dangers and horrors of radiation and started a significant campaign calling to a total ban on nuclear weapons. The movement spread like fire across Japan and gathering more than 30 million signatures and leading to the holding on the World Conference against A&H, atomic and hydrogen bombs. Hibakusha, who had been forced to live in silence and in hiding until then, came out on the open to have their voices heard. Consequently, in 1956, so 11 years after the atomic bombing, Hibakusha funded Nihon Hidankyo, Japan Confederation of A&H Bomb Sufferers Organization. And the message to the world, the founding declaration of Nihon Hidankyo stated, we have reassured our will to save humanity from its crisis through the lessons learned from our experiences, while at the same time saving ourselves. Hibakusha's physical and emotional wounds have yet to be healed, and they were still feeling as putting it into words would take them back to that moment again. But their noble pledge that they do not want anyone else to go through the same experience as they did is very touching and inspiring. Since its establishment in 1956, Nihon Hidankyo has been calling for the abolition of nuclear weapons for 69 years. Nuclear weapons, which have brought about inhuman consequences, still cause after effects, leaving scars on our lives, bodies, and minds. Furthermore, they continue to cause anxiety to our children and grandchildren. Nuclear weapons are inhuman weapons that indiscriminately and extensively cause damage by blast, heat rays, and radioactivity, and their after effects persist for many years. If used again, they would inflict the same suffering experienced by the Hibakusha on many people around the world. So when the Ban Treaty in TPNW was adopted, so I feel like a very big iron door slightly opened, and I feel the ray of light coming down to us. So we actually was so pleased. So we have been pounding that iron door for many years to get that treaty. So for many years, for 70 years, we have never given up. So the hope and as Carlson said, be hopeful, positive. We have never given up. The big headache, big problem is the Japanese government. But we have to try and try. We have many recommendations to the Japanese government. So the policy of the Japanese government is NPT is the most important, and they just ignore the TPNW so far. So how can we persuade them? That's our problem. Yeah, because of the So we are trying to not only the hibakusha, but to spread out the voices of in Japan and all over Japan and in the world. We are trying. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. You really set an example, and we'll learn from your persistence and your patience, banging on the door, on the iron door that
Yes.
finally opened
Mhm.
and showed at least a ray of light. So
Mhm.
thank you. It's very, very moving testimony.
Thank you.
There's been some other questions as well. Some of them I think we have already covered. Others, maybe we can still go through some of them. For example, someone is asking if there's anything to learn from demobilization for climate justice. And someone else is stressing, for example, the importance to come together and thinks that maybe the World Social Forum gatherings could be an inspiration for the movement, to have some people's assemblies, bringing people together across countries, across regions. How do you think about this, Nick or Carlos?
Yes, first and foremost, thank you, Wada-san and Nihonki Ankyo and Gensukyo,
Thank you.
because like the stories are powerful. I can't remember who was the author of this quote, but it said, "Those who tell stories control the world." Right. So our basis is, of course, evidence, scientific. We hold the truth, but the truth itself is not enough, right? And we need to connect people with the human side, to have like the human face of nuclear weapons. And the testimonies of the survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but also the survivors of the nuclear tests, were essential to get support for the negotiations in the TPNW and to feel like that connection with what nuclear weapons are. So yes, thank you for that. Regarding the movement, for instance, the climate change movement, what we're seeing with the climate change movement is, of course, a heavy involvement by youth, right? If we see, for instance, a big example is Fridays for the Future, that was uh, started and revolutionized by a Swedish schoolgirl, right? And a lot of very young people who did not wait to have access to like the adult-centric spaces. They themselves have decided to use their voice and have their own space, and they took the world by storm. They are taking the world by storm, even if the powers are still very slow to react to the crisis as it is right now. So we definitely, what we can learn from the climate movement is the inclusivity, is how we have to involve all the voices, make sure that no voice is left behind, that everybody's voice matters. And that we are not like, in ICANN, we have that very, very clear. Well, I both have PPNW, but ICANN is a broad coalition of now 650 plus organizations in 110 countries. And what we are clear about is that it's not a top to bottom movement, right? Like if people have ideas, like how can I help? You get involved and you help. So that organicity, that quality that the climate movement has, that is something that we definitely need. And one of the things that is happening now in having two wars right now in the world that involve two nuclear weapon states, while it is more uphill politically to get support for the TPNW, to get support for the ban treaty, and to fight against nuclearism on a political level, a lot of people are paying attention. A lot of people are reading books like this one and watching stuff about nuclear weapons. So this is something that we need to take advantage of. This is a good opportunity for our movement to grow. And what we're after really is a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift, uh, this big change does not start at the top. It starts at the grassroots.
Okay.
And that's where we should focus on as the climate change
Yes.
does. So yes, of course, let's spread out there. Let's bring attention to the perils of nuclear weapons, and let's all get involved.
Thank you. Can I say something? One more?
Sure, go
Yeah.
ahead.
My mother died 14 years ago at the age of 89, and she was in and out of the hospital 28 times. And before she died, I once recorded what she witnessed in writing, but she seemed so dissatisfied. And what she read, it was nothing like that. That's it. So I know, I know other senior citizens, I mean, senior hibakushias must feel the same as she did. So I always feel kind of have a hesitation to tell her story to other people. So I cannot tell enough description what had happened really. But I cannot add anything. I cannot make a story beside what she said. So that's my reality. That's her reality. So I cannot put anything else, something else. Just straight. That's I know I cannot have enough data, but that's it. But so 80 years passed. So I have to tell. I have to tell in my own words, in her own words. That's what I did.
So thank you, others. And actually, in the chat, Bud is reminding us that there's even a Hibakusha Park in a small town in Belgium called Mons. So they inaugurated just recently a Hibakusha Park to commemorate and to tell the story of the Hibakusha to the next generations.
Thank you.
I think that's good to know.
Yeah.
Maybe, Nick, before we close, do you want to comment on this movement building?
I would love to. Yeah, specifically, I'll suppose try to briefly say what's all in my brain about specifically the discourse is very interesting in the chat about taking lessons from the climate movement. I was heavily involved in the most recent wave of US sort of like youth climate movement. I was heavily involved in the Sunrise Movement organization, which pushed sort of the US, in our view, to take climate change far more seriously and frame the solution more as a sort of federal mobilization to enact climate justice rather than just, focus on carbon footprints. And, we were pushing tons of legislators and lawmakers to, if they did not say that climate change was a top priority, they would essentially be unelectable. And our movement gained incredible momentum, as some of the people in the chat are saying, through 2019, basically up until the pandemic. And then the pandemic sort of took a lot of attention away from climate and, of course, towards other issues of global health and economy and things like this. But one of the things that we used to say in the Sunrise Movement that grew to hundreds and hundreds of organizations around the United States of young people who were motivated to say, our future is on the line. These leaders are doing nothing. We want to take action, is exactly what Carlos and Wada-san and others in the chat are saying. It was actually our tactic was to tell our personal stories as sort of, yeah, our own testimony to say, this is important to us, share the stories in our local communities, not necessarily, just on social media or, just in forums like these, but go back to our friends, families, schools, all these local institutions that sort of grow the collective consensus of our experience that we're all sort of having individually. But then when we come together, we realize we're all having similar experiences, and then there's a lot of power there to then build um, consensus and what do we do and how can we push. So I certainly echo the power of storytelling. And I will say, as well as we were saying before, I think one of the things that we learned from the most recent climate push in the United States is we'll build the power, we'll build the youth power, but at the same time, we also need to sort of structuralize these changes and make them lasting. So, because there are always counter stories, right, from the other side that can be used to sort of push back against our testimony. So, in addition to speaking in your own communities, uplifting your own story, also think of ways that, everyone, all of you can take leadership and build, our own collective power to really change the structure of the system, in addition to sharing the story, which I think is, yeah, what organizations like those I learned about in Japan, I think have been doing for decades. And it was just brilliant to see how they have really created a culture of peace and structures in the schools and in local organizations around peace that really, really impressed me. And I think we should take back to all of our organizing efforts.
So thank you so much. Thank you, Nick. I think we're going to conclude here because we're 1.5 hours into our webinar. Wada-san is probably already thinking of going to bed while Carlos and are thinking about their morning coffee. And you deserve it, all of you. So for me, I think there are three takeaways from this discussion. History matters in the first place. So nuclear weapons have always been tools of imperial coercion. That's what we learned. But on the other hand, action and solidarity are important. We've heard many concrete examples about action, about networks that prove that collective action can also rewrite the rules. And my third takeaway is that we can win. I've learned this from Jeremy, from Carlos. Biological weapons have been banned. Chemical weapons have been banned. There is no reason why there shouldn't be a ban as well one day on nuclear weapons. So if this conversation sparks something in you, please make sure to keep the momentum going. Share your insights on social media. Tag one of the speakers or one of their organizations or the League Against Imperialism Centennial Campaign. About the campaign, you can find more information and the links to our socials on our website. And the website is very simple. It's lai27.net, LAI27.net. And we will organize many more events, similar events in the future. So from my part, there's heartfelt thanks to Jeremy, to you, Wada-san, to Carlos and Nick for sharing their expertise, to all of you participants for your questions and participation.